Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Haley Brooks. Haley Brooks is a 2013 graduate from BHSU. She has obtained a master's from Rutgers University of New Jersey in Library Information Science. Further, she has tons of experiences. Her experiences range from an internship at the U.S. Holocaust Museum and spending 10 days with a Holocaust survivor named Eva Moses-Kor in Poland. She hopes to continue her education and try to educate and raise awareness for the Holocaust and genocide studies. So without further ado, let's welcome Haley Brooks.
Thank you. Thanks, Brianne. I'm a little nervous, but that's okay. So first, I'd like to thank Black Hills State University for having me be a part of their lecture series this semester. As Brianne stated a little bit about me, I actually grew up here in Rapid, and I graduated from Douglas High School in 2007. I then continued to earn my bachelor's in history with a minor in business administration from Black Hills State University in 2013. While I was at Black Hills State University, I actually had the opportunity to take a course by Dr. Havila called Politics of the Holocaust. And I've always been interested in World War II history. I'm a huge history buff, but specifically World War II history and the Holocaust, wondering how could something so terrible happen. And it was in Dr. Havila's class that I first had a full in-depth submersion into the information about the Holocaust. During the course, Dr. Havila actually hosted Eva Moses-Kor, a Holocaust survivor and an activist for the message of forgiveness. Although to tell you everything I can about this extraordinary woman, I only have about an hour, so I won't do all of that today. But this was the first time that I met Eva. After this, I began following Holocaust and genocide awareness institutions on social media, Facebook pages, Twitter, including Eva's Museum Candles in Terre Haute, Indiana, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. These actions led me to the opportunities that I'm going to share with you this evening. I continued to work on my education with Black Hills State University, finishing up my museum studies certificate, and then I applied for an internship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. Funny thing is, I actually forgot that I had applied for the internship until a month and a half later. I received an email saying, "We would like to telephone you for an interview for the 2014 summer internship program." I was really excited and then realized I should probably talk to my job about whether I can go to Washington, D.C. for these 10 weeks. Fortunately for me, I work with a company here in Rapid City called Black Hills IP, and we do a lot of computer work. So I was able to work remotely from Washington, D.C. and stay with my brother for those 10 weeks. The summer of 2014, I worked these 10 weeks at the museum, working at the museum 3 days a week while working 10-hour shifts the other 4 days of the week for my regular job. So needless to say, it was a very, very busy summer for me. While I was at the Holocaust Museum, I had the privilege to work with some amazing people, including survivors, descendants of survivors, and many others who have dedicated their lives to educating the public about the Holocaust, genocide studies, and awareness. Some More Neighbors is an exhibition on the lower level of the museum that presents stories of how regular, ordinary people made a choice to be complacent, collaborate, or stand against Nazi atrocities and hate crimes against the Jewish population. According to the text at the museum's exhibit, millions of ordinary people witnessed the crimes of the Holocaust, and the Nazis continuously found countless willing helpers who collaborated or were complicit in their crimes. The exhibit helps try to explain, analyze, and compare what motivations and pressures existed for these people and why some made the choice to help. In this picture, you can see that the exhibition actually begins with a long corridor with photos of groups of people, with voices on a loop overlaying the experience of survivors. The text you see on the screen actually comes from the exhibit wall itself and explains a little more specifically what the exhibit is about. Somewhere Neighbors examines a variety of motives and pressures that influenced individual choices to act. These influences often reflect fear, indifference, anti-Semitism, career concerns, community standing, peer pressure, or chances for material gain. It also looks at individuals who did not give in to the opportunities and temptations to betray their fellow human beings, reminding us that there is always an alternative to complicity in evil acts, even under extraordinary times. And here I have a brief video about the Somewhere Neighbors exhibition.
Somewhere Neighbors.
And among them was some of the people he went to school with, some of his best friends, the guys from the card club.
And out of that crowd came a friend of my father.
We were friends, I thought.
This was a boy that grew up with me for 16 years, and he could do something like this.
And that was my best friend.
They were neighbors.
The furniture and the glass was all in shatters. Everything was, my father's butcher store, the window was broken in and everything was demolished. And this was done by young people whom we knew.
After the Holocaust, many survivors recognized the roles of Adolf Hitler and other true believers. Ideological hardliners who supported the Nazi Party early on and who viewed Jews as biologically inferior. But how could so many ordinary fellow human beings, even people they knew, have betrayed them, taken pleasure in their persecution, benefited in some way from their misfortune? Before the Holocaust, Jewish life in Europe was diverse. In some places, especially in Central and Western Europe, many Jews were integrated into the larger society through school, the workplace, and other settings. In Eastern Europe, many of the millions of Jews who lived there resided in predominantly Jewish communities, meeting non-Jews through business and the marketplace. After the Nazis took power in Germany, the new regime's goal was to deprive Jews of their rights and livelihoods and force them to leave the Reich. During World War II, Germany conquered and directly ruled vast areas of Eastern Europe. The marking and isolation of Jews from non-Jews were first steps toward their destruction. German-ruled Eastern Europe became the main terrain for the mass murder of Jews by Germans and their collaborators, including many Jews who lived far away, in countries allied with or occupied by Germany, whom collaborating police often assembled for transport to the east.
One of the nastiest memories I have is going on that journey, and people were lined up the stairs, up to the door of the apartment, waiting to ransack whatever we left behind, cursing at us, yelling at us, spitting at us as we left.
The Holocaust would not have happened without centuries of the longest hatred, prejudices, discrimination, and attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Jews were a religious minority in largely Christian Europe. Other pressures and motives, ones that affect individuals in less extreme circumstances, also came to the fore. Fears and pressures in school, work, and the community, roles as students, teachers, workers, police, soldiers, neighbors, friends, influenced their choices to go along with their peers or to defer to authority, even when they had some moral qualms.
This is the real truth. That was my girlfriend. We used to go to her together, have fun together, left together before the last test, before the graduation. We were studying together for nights and nights, and she did it to me, to us, to my family.
Many individuals also succumbed to pressures, risks, and age-old temptations. While it might be comforting to think that people were simply forced to do what they did, or that they were even brainwashed, examples of individuals who did help those in danger prove that people did have choices, even in the face of great risks and temptations.
So Leo had a great deal of our possession at that point. And we went to Leo for food. Now, I must impress upon you as to the character of Leo. Leo already had all the stuff that he could ever get from us, except maybe for some land. And all he had to do is tell us to get lost, and he would have never seen us again. He never did. He fed us all along.
At crucial junctures, every individual makes decisions, and every decision is individual. So what was it like for people under these circumstances? I'm not going to, and I don't pretend to know all of the factors that played in decisions that were made. But what motives drive people to make the choices that they do? The film talked about social pressures, economic troubles, fear of punishment. If I make this decision, if I stand up for this person, am I going to be thrown in jail? Am I going to be beat? What will others think of me? Is it going to affect those around me? If I make a decision, is it going to affect my mother, my father, my sister, or my children? Other temptations that were mentioned were greed. He talked about people lined up his apartment waiting to grab everything that they had to leave behind when they were deported. Career advancement, power, jealousy, and revenge. One thing that the Somewhere Neighbors exhibition does that is really impactful to me is it juxtaposes the choices made by people and individuals who share similar environmental circumstances. Here you have two policemen. One local policeman in Frankenberg was put on trial in 1952 in Germany for his role of turning a Jewish teacher over to the SS during Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Yet you have another police officer, Erich Schrock of Fetzberg, who protected a Jewish family from an angry mob during Kristallnacht. What were the differences in their circumstances? What made one make the decision to stand up for this family versus turning them over to the SS? What I've learned from my experiences and my research is that bravery and courage can conquer. George Weiss was born in 1926 in Romania. He worked at a paper mill, and when his foreman told him not to wear a Star of David badge at work because it would make him less recognizable by the Germans, and he could pass as a non-Jew. When a German officer came in looking for Jews in hiding, it was actually a friend of his that he had known for several years who betrayed him. He saw his friend talking to the German officer, and he knew what was happening. So he went to his foreman, but rather than his foreman saying, "Sorry, there's nothing I can do," his foreman took the chance at hiding him and told him to go to his home, where he was able to hide for 3 days until finally they were caught. And in 1944, Weiss was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he remained until liberation. And his parents and 2 siblings were murdered at the Auschwitz Killing Center. When you're put in a position of authority, or a position you may not realize could have an impact on an individual, do you choose to assist them, or do you choose to condemn them? On the screen is a picture of identification cards that were marked with red ink in French, issued by Belgian officials in compliance with German decrees. Clearly, the red ink is very visible, and it was easy to identify and difficult for the bearers of these cards to avoid arrest at checkpoints. In the exhibit, you read about a man who had this job, who chose not to put that stamp on papers, allowing these people to successfully cross the borders into freedom. Another story that I found during my research that I thought was pretty remarkable is of Katie Torres, who was protected by doctors and staff where she was hospitalized for tuberculosis in Greece. They held her under an assumed name and kept her safe until a military canteen that she had that was a gift from her father drew attention from a German guard looking for Jews in hiding. He noticed on her chart her Sephardic Jewish name, and it drew a gun to her head. She got hysterical, and the staff and doctors came to her side. The doctor spoke quietly to the guard, and then the guard just left. She found out later that the doctor lied to the German and said, her condition is terminal. She's only going to live a couple more weeks. So the German officer left. She and her father were reunited after the war, but her mother and her sister were also killed after being deported to Auschwitz. So where does this put us as individuals? During my research for this presentation, I came across and read a novel called Neighbors, and this is an excerpt that hit home to my message. Each episode of mass killings had its own situational dynamics. In each episode, many specific individual decisions were made by different actors present on the scene who decisively influenced outcomes. And thus, it is at least conceivable that a number of those actors could have made different choices, with the result of many more European Jews surviving the war. I had learned so much after my time at the Holocaust Museum in D.C. that when I returned here to Rapid, I wanted to try and raise awareness about not only Holocaust studies, but genocide awareness. So I continued to follow groups of museums for information, to work on networking, as well as obtain resources through social media. And it's through this that I discovered a trip that Ava's Candles Museum holds every year. A trip to Auschwitz with Ava herself. I went on this trip this past summer of 2016 with Ava and 100 other individuals from all over the world. I met some extraordinary people on this trip while seeing in person the Auschwitz-Birkenau and Auschwitz II camps, and hearing firsthand the experience of Ava and the atrocities that she faced. Another location that we visited was the Oskar Schindler factory. Many people know the story of Oskar Schindler is made famous by the movie Schindler's List. Schindler was a sympathetic factory owner who purchased an enamel factory in Krakow, Poland, shortly after the Germans invaded. He used his charm and his wit and his resources to create a separate branch at the labor camp of Plaszow in order to protect his growing 900 Jewish workforce at the enamel factory and to protect them from the atrocities of the camp. Throughout the war, he continued to use Jewish laborers for his enamel factory. And in 1944, Schindler convinced German officials to allow him to reestablish an armaments factory in Moravia. taking with him his 1,200 Jewish workforce, saving them from their fate with the Germans. Schindler is one of the more well-known righteous among the nations, who are individuals that are non-Jewish individuals, recognized by Yad Vashem Museum in Israel. But not many people had the resources or the influence that Schindler had to pull off such a rescue. I want to share with you another very specific and personal story of an individual who had nothing but saved the lives of several people. On the trip in Poland with me was a woman by the name of Jeannie Smith, and she's pictured there on the bottom right with Ava. One evening, after returning from the camps, we listened to Jeannie share the story of her mother, Irene Gut Opdyke. Irene's story can be read in the book In My Hands, Memoirs of a Holocaust Rescuer. I cannot myself do justice to this remarkable story, and I recommend that you seek out and look up her story for yourself, or seek to hear Jeannie share her mother's story. But I will do my best to provide you with an overview of this incredible and remarkable account. There was a bird flushed up from the wheat fields, disappearing in a blur of wings against the sun, and then a gunshot and it fell to the earth. But it was not a bird, and it was not in the wheat field, but you can't understand what it was yet. It's an excerpt from her book, In My Hands. Irene was 17 years old in 1939 when the Germans invaded Poland. After she had graduated high school, Irene wanted to become a nurse. But the only nursing school was actually in a town several towns away from where her family lived, in Radom, which is right on the border of Germany and Poland at the time. So she went to nursing school, and in the summer of 1939 revisited her family, and they felt the growing pressures and the growing tension with Germany, and begged her to stay. But she wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to help people. So she went back to school. And then in September of 1939, she came out of school, and there were planes overhead, and her country didn't exist anymore. Germany had invaded Poland. So now she's stuck at her nursing school, which quickly became a makeshift hospital for those who were injured by the invasion. And she worked there for several weeks until one day a gentleman came in claiming that he belonged to the Polish underground, which was actually a group of resistance fighters that were fighting the Germans and was seeking volunteers to help with their cause. So Irene and her teacher decided to join the underground and went into the woods where they were camping and decided to do everything she could to help. It gets really cold in Poland during the winter, kind of like here in South Dakota. It's pretty cold. So one of the jobs that they had to do was go on supply runs to obtain blankets and other materials that they needed. And so Irene went on one of these supply runs with a group of people, and she was point person. So she was to stay on the road while the rest of them went into town to get supplies. And when Jeannie tells the story, she explains that her mother smelled the smells of the nearby bakery and just got lost in the scents and kind of just got lost in her own mind. And before she knew it, there was a truck of Russian soldiers that were coming upon her. So she tried to run, and she ran and ran, but she wasn't fast enough, and they caught her. When they caught up to her, they beat her, they gang raped her, and they left her in the snow. She doesn't know how long she laid there, but another truck of Russian soldiers came. But this time, this group decided to help her. They took her to a nearby hospital where she was nursed back to health. But because she was part of the underground, she couldn't get set free. So then she was stuck working at the hospital. While she was at the hospital, she found a way to escape and realized she had to be close to a town where she believed her aunt had a house. So she was going to try and make it to her aunt's house, hoping that her family would be there too. So she was walking through the next town when she came across a part of the town that was empty, and it was weird. There was no people. And she was so tired from running and from walking that she found refuge in the top floor of a building, and she took a nap and she rested. And she woke up to a sound outside. And when she looked out the window, she saw a sight that nobody was meant to see. And it was a death march. And it was in this death march where this bird that was not a bird was witnessed by Irene. A Nazi guard took the baby out of the hands of a mother and shot it. She followed the death march to the edge of town where she witnessed a mass execution. And she vowed to herself at that moment that she was going to do everything in her power to help in any way she could. She didn't know how she was going to help, but she knew it wasn't right. She ended up getting to the town where her aunt lived, and before she could knock on the door, her aunt came out along with her 5 sisters and her mother and father. She was briefly reunited with them when several days later the Germans came and separated the family. Those who were fit to work were set off to factories. Her father was sent to the Western Front because he was an architect and they needed help building infrastructure for the Germans. So Irene was working in an armaments factory when a major came in, and she'd been so anemic she ended up passing out in front of the major. And when she woke up, she was in his office and she was so scared because if she was too weak to work, who knows what was going to happen to her? Was she going to get sent to a camp? Was she, she didn't know what was going to happen. And she begged and she pleaded and she said, I can do it. I can do the work. It's hard to tell from this picture, but Irene was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and with a last name like Gut, and she spoke fairly good German. This German major decided that he could use her to help him at the camp. And he asked her, are you German? She said, no, I'm Polish. Well, I like your honesty. So he took her to this camp, but it wasn't a labor camp. It was actually a camp for German officers and was housed right next to one of the ghettos. And it was here that she was put in charge of food service to serve food to the officers who were visiting, as well as to be in charge of a laundromat. When she was taken to the laundromat, which is also where she stayed in a room above the laundromat, she met 12 Jews that were being forced to work in the laundromat, and they became her friends. Now, the interesting thing about Irene is she was working for the Germans, but what they didn't know is that after their meals, she would take the scraps of food and deliver it to the ghetto or to the Polish underground. And she made these choices knowing she could get caught, and sent to a camp. The other thing that she was privy to was information during the meals that were being served to the officers. And it was this information that she would pass along to her network in the underground. Finally, one day, she overheard a visiting officer say, don't worry about any of your Jewish workers because they're going to be deported. You need to find replacements for them. The major was like, well, who am I supposed to hire? He said, I don't know. Find someone else to do the work, but they're being taken away. Irene didn't know what she was supposed to do. Was she supposed to tell her friends at the laundromat that they were going to be deported? Or was she just supposed to keep it to herself and let what was going to happen happen? She ended up telling them what she heard. And they begged and they pleaded with her, Irene, please help us, please. What was she to do? She had a single room above a laundromat that was owned by the Germans. So that night she prayed for a miracle. And the next day she got that miracle. The next day the major told her that he was going to be requisitioning a villa that was at the edge of the town, and that he was going to have her be his housekeeper. So she went with the major to look at this villa and realized it was a huge villa, had to have been owned by wealthy individuals before the war, and big buildings mean decent hiding places. So she asked the major if she could have a pass that would allow her to freely move from the camp to the villa in order to get the house ready for him for the end of the week. And it was with this pass that she was able to take all 12 of her friends from the laundromat and hide them in the basement of the villa. Now, at the end of the week, the major came with a large group of German officers to help clean up the place, and she was really nervous. But they looked to her for direction, so she had them clean one area and move her friends to a different area, and then move them back, and then they would clean that area. So she was able to keep them in hiding during this whole cleaning process and preparation for the major's villa. Afterwards, she was then presented with the idea of having a German person come and help her prepare the meals for the parties that they were going to be having every evening. And she begged the major, because she knew it was going to be difficult to hide her friends. She begged and begged, please don't have anyone come. She had to tell the major about her run-in with the Russians and how she was uncomfortable with other men. And he said, don't be silly, I won't let anything happen to you. Well, just the same, I wouldn't be comfortable. So he said, all right, Irene, I'll go ahead and let you do this, but if you mess up one time, I'm going to bring in help, and you're going to have somebody here to help you. Well, little did the major know she had 12 little helpers of her own. So as time went on, I don't know if you guys know, but older style locks have a situation with the keys where if you put a key in on the inside, you can't unlock it from the outside. And so that was her way of hiding her friends. The major would go to work. She would put the key in the door on the inside. So when he came home, she would have time to hide her friends in the basement and then unlock the door for the major. So as time went on, this is exactly how everything went. The major would go to work. She would let her friends out. They would help her clean and prepare all the food for the festivities of the evening. They would go back in the basement. She would let the major in, and there you have it. Well, one day, Irene had to go to town to get some supplies. And while she was in town, she was in the shop, a German officer came in just yelling, everybody get out, everybody get outside. And she was really scared. She was really nervous. And when she went outside, there was a family of a Christian family who had been caught hiding Jews. And the Germans hung their children in front of the parents to let them watch, and then hung the parents to make an example of people who were hiding Jews. This shook Irene up quite a bit, as you can imagine. She went back to the building, but because she was so shaken up, she forgot to do the one thing that she had been doing this entire time, and she forgot to put the key in the door. So as her and her friend were in the kitchen preparing meal for that night, they heard a noise at the kitchen door, and it was the major. And he was not happy. He got really upset and went into his office, which was the only place in the building that had a phone. And Irene put her friends back down in the basement and told them not to come out until she said it was okay. She went to talk to the major. How could you do this, Irene? How could you do this to me? After everything that I've done for you, how could you do this to me? They're my friends, she told him. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. So after several hours, he called her back in. And again, she was really nervous because she knew that, what this could mean for her and her friends. And he grabbed her and sat her on his lap, and he said, listen, I'm not going to tell, because how is it going to make me look being a major and having 12 Jews hiding in my own house? But you will be mine now anytime that I want. And so she became his mistress. And she never told her friends about the decision that she made, knowing that they wouldn't let her jeopardize her integrity for their sake. But this was the decision she had to make to save her friends. Well, in 1944, the Germans got orders to go west to try and get away from the Russian army that was approaching. And the major looked at Irene and said, are you coming with me? She said, no, I can't. I need to find my family. I need to know what happened to my family. So he left. And she got a hold of her underground friends and said, I'm coming. Make room. I also have 12 people coming with me. So they were able to then spend the rest of their time in the woods until the Russians came. But Irene wasn't safe because she was the mistress of a Nazi major. So she actually had to run around and try and stay away from both Germans for hiding Jews and Russians for being the mistress of a Nazi officer. She ended up at a displaced persons camp where she met a gentleman named William Updike, who was a UN worker from New York City. He offered her passage to America. She came to America, and within 5 years, she became an American citizen. This story became very personal to me because I heard it firsthand from this incredible woman's daughter. I've read about the Holocaust heroes, about the righteous among nations, witnessed exhibits that shared countless stories of those who risked everything to do what's right. But this personal story, delivered from Irene's daughter, was such an incredible story, told with such love, compassion, and purpose. Here are some words from Jeannie. My mom's passion was to reach others with the message that we are all part of one human family, and that we certainly are our brother's keeper. Nowhere is this message more important than with school-aged children. Her voice is still being heard. Stand up against hate in all forms. Be willing to step up. Speak out and become actively involved in showing love, compassion, and human decency to all.
One person can make a difference. And it doesn't matter. And what I love about my mom's story, forget that she's my mom, is, you have people like Schindler who have an amazing story, but he had a factory and he had influence. We're talking about a girl out of high school who didn't even have her parents or her home or anything. And so it takes all of our excuses away. It takes mine away.
This solidified my conviction in wanting to share my experiences and to help educate the choices that we make in life on a daily basis can make a world of difference, no matter how small they may seem. When Jeannie began her speech in Poland, she said that her mother would always ask the children that she would speak to that in order to portray a reenactment of the Holocaust or any atrocity, there are 3 parties that you need to represent. You need to represent the perpetrators, the victims, and the largest group of all, the bystanders. But how does this lesson apply to us today? What can we take from stories such as Irene's or those presented at the United States Holocaust Memorial Somewhere Neighbors exhibit. I don't pretend to know what it's like to be a person living in Poland or in Germany or in any part of Europe during the 1930s and 40s. But I do know what it's like to be somebody living here today. What does someone do when they see something happening? Has it started changing? Is there hope? Well, I've shared with you 2 experiences that tell me that there is hope, because I've met hundreds of individuals who share the same message. And it starts with me, and it starts with you. As Irene said, one person can make a difference. To kids, it may be seeing someone get bullied on the playground at school. What do? Do they stand up and let it happen? What about you and I? Today I'm taking a stand against ignorance, and I'm talking to you about the lessons that I have learned through my fortunate experiences and opportunities that I've had. So what's next? Educate. Reach out. Talk to those that you love, and be a voice of love and compassion. My biggest advocacy is trying to teach people from my generation and reaching forward to generations of the future about tolerance, about respect, forgiveness, and most of all, the ability to have courage and conviction to stand up against what is wrong. I'd like to give special thanks to Jeannie Smith for her presentation to us about her mother's story in Krakow, Poland on July 11th, 2016. To Ava Moses Kor and the Candles Museum for their story of forgiveness. To Black Hill State University and Dr. Robert Havila for starting me on my journey. To the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I spent 10 weeks with an experience of a lifetime. Photos and video in this presentation were retrieved from USHMM.org, IreneGutOpdyke.com, and personal photos from the Auschwitz 2016 trip hosted by the Candles Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. Other resources are Neighbors by John T. Gross, In My Hands by Irene Gut Opdyke, and the Somewhere Neighbors exhibit of USHMM Online. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes? I suppose I could figure out a way to make that happen. It is being recorded this evening. The question was, will this presentation be available for other groups? And again, I definitely feel like it's my duty to share my experiences and educate those around me with the lessons that I've learned. So I definitely could work with you to make that happen. Black Hill State University is also recording this presentation. It should be available on their website, is my understanding. Are there any other questions? Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. No, and that's the important. So the statement was, we haven't learned very much, have we? And the answer to that is no. If you look at the political environment that we're experiencing today, if we're looking at the media, the mass media, the titles that the media loves to give, in the end, we're all humans. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we can take away from today, is that we're all part of the same species. We all have rights to be who we are, no matter if that means different race, a different gender, a different definition of gender, a different sexual orientation, a different religion. So tolerance is a very big lesson that we can take away from stories like Irene's and all the other stories that we can take from the Holocaust if we just look and make the comparisons. Do you mind speaking for the presentation? Thank you.
I was on a trip with about 14 other people, very isolated trip. And over the months, what happened is, because our only community was ourselves, that each person in turn became the scapegoat. And one of the most moving experiences I've had, when I could see that it was my turn next, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. And it brought to my attention what I did not do when the others were scapegoats, what I couldn't do when I was one, that this kind of talk has very much relevance to working with the current human condition. It's built into us. This is not something that happened at one time. This is how we are.
Yes, thank you very much. And I wish I did have this quote, but there is a very infamous quote relating to the Holocaust that said, "First they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for someone else, but I wasn't them, so I didn't speak out. And then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak for me." So, again, I think the most important thing that we can do as individuals in society with the human condition, as you mentioned, is to educate ourselves and then take the responsibility to turn around and educate those around us, and hopefully end up with a ripple effect that can improve the human condition of the future. Are there any more questions? First, I'd like to introduce Brittany. She actually went on the Poland trip with me she's wearing our shirt. We had shirts that says never, never ever give up. I have to turn it on. Sorry.
What was your favorite part of Poland, of going to Poland? Like, which part of it impacted you the most? Because I know there was a lot for me, and it's definitely hard to choose because 10 days is a lot. But was there like one specific moment that like stood out for you?
That's a really good question. And as you said, 10 days is a lot, but the packed full 10 days that we experienced in Poland, it felt more like a month. It didn't feel like 10 days, especially when you look back on this trip. I think I would have to say bearing witness to Ava's story, seeing firsthand where these atrocities occurred. And I think one of the things that unnerved me the most was being at Auschwitz, where millions of people were murdered, and then seeing people just walking their dog outside the camp gates. And not that they lived near it. So look at South Dakota's history with our relationship with Native Americans. We walk through heavy places of our past as well. That and just the reflection pieces that we shared as a group, I think, afterwards were the most impactful, because it allowed you to look inside yourself and teach yourself lessons, but then also rely on other people who experienced the same things that you did and made these lifelong connections with the people on the trip with you. So you know you always have someone to go to talk about it. And one of the things that Keel was kind of one of our leaders that he had said was, you're going to be surprised when you go home. Because when you go home, that's when it hits a lot of people. And I remember trying to go through some of my photos, and I couldn't go through the photos. I mean, I was there. I cried a little bit, not as much as I thought I would. But then after I came back and I started going through my photos, I broke down. And I know others had a similar experience where they were just sad. But again, I think it makes us stronger, and I think we have a duty to share this experience then with those who didn't have that same opportunity. Mm-hmm.
I stand around crowds.
I think the mic's turned off. Sorry.
Okay.
It will, yeah.
Let me start again.
There you go. Sorry.
My name is Stephen Ben. I'm the president of the Synagogue of the Hills. And I have occasion to go to D.C. fairly frequently on a yearly basis. And I do go to the Holocaust Museum not because I don't know what's there. On the contrary, I probably have it memorized. But I do spend time eavesdropping. And it's really remarkable, the reactions that people have of incredulity on one hand and, talking about what they're going to do at the mall.
Yeah.
It's really quite remarkable. I understand what you say. I spent 4 months in Rwanda just after the genocide as a physician there, and I understand what you're talking about when you talk about the incomprehensibility of what you experience, and it does take time for it to mark itself on your frontal cortex and integrate into how this impacts me on here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that story. Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, my name's Larry Harding. 1991, I was selected to be in charge of security at the Holocaust Museum. I got another job that paid more, and I went, but I got to spend 2 weeks. And the biggest thing that I remember from those 2 weeks at the Holocaust Museum was the largest group, the bystanders. And to this day, we have so many that aren't speaking up. And it touched me to be a part of this. And Dr. Havel and I have talked, and he's a great man and knowledgeable. This is what I learned those 2 weeks was the bystanders. The perpetrators and the victims we can pretty all understand, but the bystanders we still stand around.
Mm-hmm. I actually earlier today, Lori Walsh from In the Moment from South Dakota Public Broadcasting Radio called and interviewed me on the telephone. And one of the things that she asked me in the interview, and I'm not quoting directly, but basically was, how many of these stories of the bystanders are we hearing? Because as you mentioned, we know who the victims were, and we hear their stories, and we know who the perpetrators were, and we see their stories. And it's difficult to find them, so I called them gems, because I think the biggest lesson that we can learn are from the bystanders and individuals who can make individual decisions to stand against something because they have the moral conviction to do what's right. And again, educating the future generations of the world is, I think, where it begins. Yes.
I was young and pretty stupid.
Hold on one moment. We're going to give you the microphone.
I was young and pretty stupid at one point in high school. I'd been asked to spend the night at a friend's house, and I found out while I was there that they were from Germany. And this now, I'm almost 80, guys, so you can figure how many years ago that was. And I said, oh, gee, I'm German, because I'm German, Irish, and English, and I thought we had something in common. And this girl lived with her grandmother, and she just turned all kinds of pale. So you got to know she had survived the Holocaust over there. And in my naivety, it wasn't necessarily stupidity. I just thought we had something in common, and I scared her half to death. You know.
Hi, I don't know if you can answer this or you can answer this for me. It's just a numbers thing I need to know. I know there are how many millions of Jews died in the Holocaust, but how many others died also? And I ask that having had relatives that lived in Poland at the time.
Actually, so I believe that the count is 6 million Jews and 12 million victims. However, that number, just from my research and experiences alone, is low, is inaccurate. Because when we were in Auschwitz, one of the things that we learned was when they got off of the trains, you were selected able-bodied or not able-bodied. So if you were an elderly, if you were a woman with a young child, or a child under a certain age, they didn't even, you were sent straight to take a shower and sent straight to the gas chambers. So there's a very large number of undocumented victims. Even though the Nazis were very good at keeping records, that was one thing that they didn't necessarily keep record of every single victim. So I think the number is higher than that as well.
I would concur. There's huge numbers, not only Jews but Slavs, homosexuals, political malcontents, anybody who thought would not contribute to the Aryan race. Numbers do reach to 7 to 10 million, and on Yom HaShoah, which is the day of commemoration, 14 days after the beginning of Passover, we light candles. We light 6 candles to represent the 6 million, and the 7th to represent everybody else. And so the victims are certainly not forgotten. Everybody went up the chimneys in the same way. I do have to recount a kind of a interesting experience. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I came out here and was adopted by the ranching community. And the first time I went out for a branding, we were gathering the cows, and they were in the in the gathering area, and there was somebody, the ramrod of the outfit, was stood up there in front and said, "Those cows there, and those cows there, and those cows there." And I stood there and got pale. And the guy next to me on his horse looked at me and asked if I was okay. And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." But, this selection, the selection process, whether it be animals or people, really connotate a decision that is being made: who shall live and who shall die.
Well, another question.
Hi, I just have a comment. because I did hear your interview this afternoon, and one of the questions that she asked you is something to the effect of how many people didn't really know what was going on, and you had mentioned that there was, again, a normal community living next door to a ghetto, so they could see across the fence or across the bridge, those type of things. I had the opportunity when we were stationed in Germany to rent from off-base housing an elderly couple who he had been a German soldier. And one of the things that, while I do think early on perhaps there were a lot that didn't know what was going on, as those rumors started, he was very remorseful from the perspective of, yeah, he was a soldier, he was doing as he was told. He wasn't seeing, the mass murders, or so to speak, but was doing whatever his daily duty was. But nonetheless, the rumors were there, and he was of the denial this wouldn't be going on, but there was enough rumors that, again, he said, looking back, he should have known, and friends and colleagues should have known. So I think that's also a personal human nature to challenge individuals that often you maybe have a little bit of a feeling, hey, something's not right, something's not going on, and you choose not to investigate it further, so that in that education process of young people, also that courage and that inclination to investigate those things further.
That's a great story in addition to that. And, one of the other things that I think is really, that I feel obligated to share my experiences with is when you're in the middle of the nation in South Dakota, you kind of have a limited opportunity for different things. And so the fact that I was able to go to DC and work directly with the staff volunteers at USHMM, as well as go on this trip with a Holocaust survivor and hear her stories and see Auschwitz in person, not a lot of people have those opportunities. And so the other thing that one of my goals is to reach out to educators in the area, especially with high schools, because there's not a lot. Again, Black Hills State University and Dr. Havila's course was the first in-depth submersion into information other than Pearl Harbor, the Americans joined the war, and I think it's really unfortunate that we don't have more of the lessons in the Holocaust and a more in-depth look at a younger level to an extent in education in the area. So that's another thing that I've been reaching out to my high school teachers to try and offer them some resources through USHMM and their education department to give them the materials needed to make that part of their curriculum and to help start a lot younger than where we are at. Thank you again for everyone for coming out this evening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.